I'm Alyssa, 22 years old, fresh out of college with a biochemistry degree from Westbridge University. My parents never approved of my choices, yet, strangely enough, they threw me a lavish graduation party. Odd, considering just last week they called me a worthless leech. As I stood there, watching the bubbles rise in my expensive champagne flute, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. My father, slipping a pinch of white powder into my glass when he thought no one was watching. My heart froze. My own father was trying to poison me. If you're hearing this, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, because I'm about to tell you how I survived my parents' betrayal and found a strength I never knew I had. To understand why my parents would ever want to harm me, you need to know what kind of family I come from. The Rockwells were never your warm, storybook household. My father, Charles Rockwell, built Rockwell Therapeutics from a single rented lab into a pharmaceutical empire worth billions. In the industry, his reputation for crushing competitors was legendary. Funding for rival projects would mysteriously vanish, or regulators would suddenly shut them down. Publicly, though, he played the role of the charming philanthropist, smiling in charity galas, shaking hands with politicians, even funding children's hospitals. My mother, Victoria, came from old East Coast money. Her family had been in pharmaceutical research for generations before she married my father and merged their fortunes. She was obsessed with appearances and the Rockwell legacy. Our mansion had been featured in architecture magazines, and she hosted fundraisers that were the crown jewel of New York society. But behind those marble walls, she was cold, calculating, and endlessly critical of me. And then there was my perfect sister, Isabel. 3 years older, flawless grades, debate team captain, and a Harvard Business School graduate. She slid right into the family company and became the heir apparent. My parents never missed her tennis matches or piano recitals. They practically worshipped her achievements, plastering her awards in every hallway. When Isabel spoke at dinner, they listened. When I spoke, my father barely lowered his newspaper. Even when I brought home straight A's, the response was always the same. That's what we expect from a Rockwell. The difference between us was obvious from the start. And it only got worse when I decided I wasn't going to follow the family script. From the time I could walk, my future had been mapped out. I would study pharmaceutical sciences, join Rockwell Therapeutics, and one day run the research division while Isabel ran the business side. My parents never asked what I wanted, they told me. But in high school, I discovered environmental science, specifically how pharmaceutical waste was poisoning rivers and ecosystems. I was fascinated and furious. When I told my father I wanted to study it in college, he dismissed it with a scoff. Tree hugger nonsense, he called it. That's when I applied to Westbridge University, not for their biochemistry program like they expected, but for environmental science. The blow-up at home was nuclear. My father threatened to cut me off. My mother wept about family duty. I refused to budge. In the end, they agreed to pay for school, but only if I minored in biochemistry and spent every summer interning at the company. I accepted, knowing full well it was the only way to keep my independence alive. But what they didn't know, what would later turn them against me, was that my maternal grandmother, Margaret, had left me a trust. She'd been a brilliant chemist herself, but had spent her career in the shadow of my grandfather. Before she died, she pulled me aside and made me promise. Don't let them mold you into something you're not. Follow your own path. The trust was ironclad. I would receive it when I turned 23 or when I graduated, whichever came last. The amount? $12 million. Money that would make me completely independent of my parents. And money they would never touch unless I died before it was released. They didn't know about it until 3 months before my graduation, when their lawyer accidentally mentioned it during a company meeting. My father's face, Isabel later told me, went white with rage. That's when everything started to change. The weeks after they learned about the trust were unnervingly quiet. No more pressuring phone calls about job interviews at Rockwell Therapeutics. No more snide remarks about my little environmental phase. Instead, my mother called one afternoon, her voice syrupy sweet. "Your father and I want to throw you a proper celebration, Alyssa. Something that reflects what it means to be a Rockwell." It should have been a red flag. But after years of cold shoulders, the sudden interest felt disorienting. Graduation day came with a sky so clear it looked painted. I stood in front of my apartment mirror, adjusting my cap. Pride and anxiety knotted in my stomach. 4 years. A 3.9 GPA. And I had done it without letting them pull me into their machine. At 9:30 sharp, a black car pulled up outside, just as my mother's text had promised. She greeted me with her usual glance of disapproval. "Couldn't you have done something more with your hair?" she said instead of "congratulations." My father didn't even look up from his phone. Only my sister broke the frost, offering a small, careful smile from a few steps away. Then, like sunlight breaking through a cloud, I heard the voice of my best friend, Jenna, cutting through the tension. She ran up in her own gown, my other closest friend, Naomi, right behind her. They'd been my family away from family, my anchor through every storm. As we chatted, I noticed my parents step aside, speaking in low, tense tones. I couldn't hear much, but my father's words carried just far enough. "We need to handle this today before it gets out of hand." When my mother caught me looking, her face snapped into that polished, social smile she wore for the cameras. "Come, darling. Let's find our seats." It wouldn't be until later that I realized this was the last moment I truly felt safe. After the ceremony, the car whisked us to the Lexington Hotel, where my parents had rented the entire rooftop terrace for my graduation party. It was staggering. Ice sculptures glistened in the afternoon sun. A champagne fountain sparkled beside a live string quartet. White roses overflowed from crystal vases, and uniformed waiters glided through the crowd with silver trays. It was the kind of event my parents reserved for business deals worth millions, never for me. Dr. Harlan, one of my professors and an old acquaintance of my father's, appeared beside me holding a glass of water. "Quite the production for you, Alyssa," he said with a knowing smile. "Not exactly their style." "I'm just as surprised as you," I admitted, scanning the crowd. Half the faces were strangers, high-profile investors, industry executives, even a few politicians. My father was deep in conversation with two men in $1,000 suits. My mother was laughing lightly with a tall man I recognized as their corporate attorney. Dr. Harlan's smile faded. "There have been rumors about Rockwell Therapeutics lately. Quiet, but troubling. You do well to keep your eyes open tonight." His words lodged in my chest like a splinter. And then, I noticed it. My parents weren't mingling the way they usually did at big events. They were watching me, constantly. Not with pride, not even their usual silent judgment, but with something else. Something sharper. Wherever I moved, one of them would casually drift to keep me in view. Then my sister sidled up beside me, her voice low. "Dad's asked me 3 times if you've told anyone your post-graduation plans." Mom keeps checking her watch like she's counting down to something. Before I could reply, My father clinked his glass. In 15 minutes, he announced, we'll have a special champagne toast to the graduate. Everyone, make sure you have a glass. And as the waiters began lining up flutes on silver trays, I caught him quietly instructing the head waiter, pointing to a single bottle with a gold label. That one, he said, for the family only. With 15 minutes until the toast, I slipped away under the excuse of finding the restroom. The main bathrooms had a long line, so I headed down a quiet service hallway I'd noticed earlier. That's when I heard it, low, urgent voices just around the corner. My mother's tone was sharp, almost panicked. Are you sure this is necessary? My father's reply came like a hiss. If we don't, we lose everything we've built. The investigation is closing in. If she gets that trust money and decides to play crusader, she could blow open the contamination at the Westbrook facility. She's always been self-righteous enough to do it. My breath caught. But drugging her at her own graduation party? My mother whispered. It's just enough to make her sick, hospitalized for a few days. That gives us time to move the assets before the trust transfers. If she dies before next week, it all reverts to us. The lawyers confirmed it. The sound of my mother's heels clicked as she shifted nervously. Keep your voice down, someone could hear us. Too late. I was pressed against the wall, heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. Their words replayed in my head, each one more chilling than the last. They weren't planning a misunderstanding. They weren't bluffing. They were planning to poison me. I forced myself to breathe evenly, stepping silently back toward the main hallway. Years of surviving their emotional landmines had taught me how to wear a mask. Tonight, that mask might save my life. When I returned to the party, I saw it immediately, waiters arranging champagne flutes on a polished silver tray. My father stood over them like a hawk, his eyes sharp, his smile polite but empty. From the corner of my eye, I caught the bartender opening that special gold-labeled bottle. My father inspected each glass closely, then placed one slightly apart from the rest. That glass was mine. I moved toward Jenna and Naomi, my voice low and steady despite the adrenaline surging in my veins. I need you to record the toast. Get my father in the frame, especially when he hands out the champagne. Don't ask why. Jenna didn't even blink. Got it. Naomi frowned. Alyssa, what's going on? Just family drama. Please. Trust me. My mind was already racing. I knew my father wouldn't use something obvious, nothing that would show up in a quick toxicology screen. It would be subtle, something that could pass as food poisoning, maybe even from their own research stock. And if I simply refused to drink, they'd try again another way. I needed evidence. When my father finally clinked his glass, calling the room to attention, my pulse thundered in my ears. He moved through the crowd, handing the special glasses to my mother, to Isabel, and then to me. Our eyes locked as he extended it. The liquid caught the light, and I saw it. A faint, cloudy swirl at the bottom. Powder that hadn't fully dissolved. To Alyssa, he said loudly, his smile fixed. May your future be everything you deserve. Every word dripped with double meaning. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. My mother stepped forward, her voice sweet as sugar. Before we drink, Charles, why don't you say a few words about our daughter? My father launched into a speech, compliments carefully wrapped in decades of disapproval. While she's chosen an unconventional path, we still celebrate her persistence. The crowd chuckled politely. I barely heard him. My focus was locked on the poisoned glass in my hand, its weight like a live grenade. Then he surprised everyone by turning to my sister and to Isabel, who embodies what it means to be a true Rockwell. That was the moment. With a bright smile, I stepped forward. Speaking of my amazing sister, I wouldn't be here without her support. She deserves a proper toast, too. Before anyone could react, I pressed my untouched champagne flute into Isabel's hand. This special reserve is too good not to share. Take mine, Izzy, I insist. She hesitated, but years of social training took over. She smiled, raised the glass, and nodded. I took her already half-drunk flute, raised it high, and looked straight into my father's eyes. To family, Isabel echoed the words and drank deeply from the glass meant for me. My father's face paled. A fine sheen of sweat broke along his hairline. My mother's fingers tightened around her own glass until her knuckles blanched. But the applause swelled, the string quartet played on, and no one else noticed. Not yet. 34 minutes later, it happened. I was chatting with one of my professors when I heard a sharp gasp from across the terrace. Heads turned. Isabel was swaying on her heels, one hand pressed to her temple. I feel strange, she murmured to a young associate beside her, her words slurring. Really dizzy. Then her knees buckled. The associate caught her just before she hit the ground. Help! Someone call an ambulance. My parents were suddenly there, panic replacing their polished composure. My father cradled her head, his voice tight. My mother's perfect makeup streaked as she shouted for help. Dr. Harlan appeared at my side, crouching down to check her pulse. Heart rates elevated and irregular, he said quickly. The associate spoke up. She was fine after the toast. Then it just hit her. My father's eyes found mine. Fury, fear, and realization all at once. I didn't blink. Stay with her, I told them, already moving toward the elevators. I'll direct the paramedics. In the lobby, Jenna and Naomi were waiting. I didn't waste a second. Jenna, send the video of the toast to my email now. When the paramedics arrive, tell them I suspect poisoning. Show them the footage. Back it up to the cloud. Do not lose it. Naomi's eyes widened. Poisoning? Alyssa, what? No time. Just trust me. The sirens were growing louder. And upstairs, the glass my father meant for me was tearing through my sister's body. The paramedics burst through the lobby doors just as the elevator dinged. My parents emerged with Dr. Harlan supporting a semi-conscious Isabel between them. She was pale, sweating, mumbling incoherently. One paramedic knelt to check her vitals. BP's dropping. Pulse is rapid and irregular. Let's move. As they lifted her onto the gurney, I stepped closer. I think she ingested a toxic substance in her champagne, I told them. The lead medic's head snapped toward me. Based on what? I have a degree in biochemistry. Symptoms started within 30 minutes after consumption. I believe it's a research-grade compound. Before I could finish, my father's hand clamped onto my arm. His voice was low and venomous. What did you do? I met his glare without flinching. She drank from my glass. The one you poured from that special bottle. His face tightened, a flicker of panic in his eyes. A paramedic interrupted. One person can ride with us. I'll go, my mother said, already climbing into the ambulance. We'll follow in the car, my father muttered, shoving me toward the exit. The drive to St. Mary's Medical Center was silent, except for the sound of my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was Jenna. Videos sent. Shows him handing you the glass. Shows the switch. What do I tell the police? Everything, I texted back. And don't let that video out of your sight. At the chaos hit instantly. Nurses swarmed Isabel, wheeling her through double doors. My mother was sobbing, telling anyone who'd listen that she'd just collapsed out of nowhere. I went straight to the nurse's station. I need to speak to her doctor immediately. I know what might be in her system. Minutes later, Dr. Patel appeared. Your sister's presenting symptoms are consistent with anticholinergic poisoning, she said. Test for cyclopentolate derivatives, modified versions. My father's company works with them. It won't show on a standard talk screen. She froze for a second, then nodded sharply. That's a very specific suggestion. I'm notifying the police. Within an hour, the OR had become a crime scene. They put me in a small consultation room, the hum of hospital machines faint through the walls. That's where Detective Ramirez walked in, tall, sharp-eyed, with a notebook already open. Walk me through everything from the beginning, she said. I told her everything, the overheard conversation, the glass, the swirl of powder, the switch with Isabel. I didn't leave anything out. She tapped her pen against the page. Why would your parents want to harm you? Money. Control, I said flatly. My grandmother left me a $12 million trust that activates next week. If I die before then, it reverts to them. They're also under an FDA investigation for contamination at one of their plants. They think I might talk. Her pen slowed, the scratch of ink deliberate. That's a serious accusation. I have proof, I said. Video of my father handing me the glass. You can also talk to Dr. Harlan. He knows about tensions in the family. And knock on the door cut me off. Dr. Patel stepped in holding a clipboard. Preliminary talks results are in, she said. Your sister's system contains a modified anticholinergic compound similar to cyclopentolate, but altered. It's not commercially available. I turned to Detective Ramirez. Exactly the kind of thing my father's lab develops. Only someone with direct access could get it. Dr. Patel's tone shifted, firm but calm. If we hadn't identified it this quickly, she could have suffered permanent heart damage. Relief hit me like a wave, but it didn't last. The detective's eyes stayed locked on mine. You realize that by your own admission, you knowingly let your sister drink what you suspected was poisoned. My throat tightened. I thought it was just enough to make me sick. I needed proof. I didn't have time to think of another way. Before she could respond, the door swung open, and my father walked in, flanked by his lawyer. My father's voice filled the room before the door even closed. This is outrageous. My daughter is mentally unstable, jealous of her sister's success. She's been making up stories about our family for years. Detective Ramirez didn't move from her seat. Mr. Rockwell, I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. His attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. My client will not be answering any further questions at this time. Ramirez didn't flinch. Your client isn't under arrest yet, but we have video evidence of him handing his daughter a specific glass and a toxicology report confirming the compound in your other daughter's system matches materials from his private lab. For a fraction of a second, I saw it, the panic. Then his face hardened again. Alyssa has always been a problem. We supported her environmental science nonsense, even through this expensive party to show we cared. And now she's spinning some twisted tale that put her own sister in the hospital. I leaned forward, my voice steady. She's in the hospital because she drank from my glass. The one you made sure I got. Before he could answer, Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway. Isabel is awake. She's asking for you, Alyssa. I followed her down the hallway, my father's voice fading behind me. Inside the dim recovery room, Isabel lay pale and hooked to monitors, her eyes fluttering open as I approached. Hey, I whispered, taking her hand. How are you feeling? Her voice was weak, like I got hit by a truck. They told me. Is it true? Did Dad really? I nodded slowly, my throat tight. I'm so sorry. You weren't supposed to drink it. I reacted. Confusion clouded her expression. Why would he do that? I told her about the trust, about the investigation, about the contamination reports I suspected they were hiding. Her grip on my hand tightened. The sealed files. I saw them last month. I didn't know what I was looking at, but now it makes sense. Heavy metals in the water. Disposal records. They've been dumping waste for years. The truth was unraveling faster than I could process, and it was only the beginning. A soft knock on the door broke the moment. Detective Ramirez stepped in, another plainclothes officer at her side. Miss Rockwell, there's something you need to know, she said, her tone measured. The FBI has been investigating Rockwell Therapeutics for 6 months. Fraud, environmental violations, falsifying clinical trial data. When we notified them about the poisoning, they confirmed they already had enough to execute search warrants on your family's offices and home. I stared at her. The FBI? They've been watching them this whole time? Ramirez nodded. Your parents were already under surveillance. What happened tonight just became another piece of a very large case. Beside me, Isabel's monitor beeped faster. Oh my God, she whispered. I signed off on some of those filings. Dad told me they were routine paperwork. If they were falsified, the other officer held up a hand. We'll need to speak with you about that later. For now, focus on your recovery. When they left, Isabel turned her eyes to me, her voice breaking. I defended them, Alyssa. Every time you complained, I told you you were being dramatic. And now, all this time, I squeezed her hand. You didn't know. They manipulated both of us, just in different ways. She swallowed hard. What happens now? I looked at her, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. Now, we tell the truth. All of it. 2 days later, the headlines hit. Pharma CEO and wife arrested for attempted murder of daughter. FBI uncovers massive fraud and environmental crimes at Rockwell Therapeutics. The Rockwell name, once polished to a blinding shine, was now shorthand for greed, corruption, and betrayal. In the days after the arrests, our world shifted overnight. The mansion that had always felt cold now stood as a silent crime scene. The Rockwell name, once whispered with respect in corporate circles, was splashed across every news outlet alongside words like fraud and attempted murder. Unexpectedly, people began reaching out. Cousins we barely knew. Distant aunts. Even my father's estranged younger brother, who'd been cut off decades ago for whistleblowing on an earlier scandal. Each had their own story of control, of retaliation, of being silenced by the family machine. And then there was Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister, who flew in from Oregon the moment she heard the news. She walked into Isabel's hospital room with open arms and a voice full of steel. I always knew Victoria was capable of terrible things, she said, looking me in the eye. But I never imagined she'd turn on her own children. The FBI's search turned up more than anyone had anticipated. Offshore accounts, falsified trial results, Years of internal emails detailing the cover-up of water contamination. Detective Ramirez pulled me aside one afternoon. The compound in your sister's system? It came from your father's private research vault, signed out by him personally 3 days before your graduation. We even found dosage calculations in his home office. Hearing it confirmed didn't make it any easier to accept. My parents hadn't just thought about harming me, they'd planned it, measured it, and executed it with precision. And through it all, Isabel and I, once barely speaking, were now allies. The golden child facade was gone. She was starting to see the truth I'd lived with for years. I was their puppet, she admitted one evening. Every move I made was to please them. My whole identity was built around being the perfect Rockwell daughter. I looked at her, my voice steady. You were also their shield. As long as you were perfect, they could paint me as the problem child. Now they can't hide behind that anymore. For the first time in years, we were on the same side. 2 weeks later, the courthouse steps were a wall of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Isabel and I walked side by side, the air between us calm but charged. Inside, the hearing room went still when we entered, the poisoned daughter and the intended target in the same frame. Our parents sat at the defense table, dressed impeccably despite weeks in custody. My mother's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw Isabel. My father didn't look at us at all. The prosecution wasted no time. They played the video of the toast, the camera catching my father handing me a specific glass, my deliberate switch, Isabel drinking instead. The toxicology report followed, showing the modified anticholinergic compound matching samples seized from his private lab. Then came the financial motive, the trust documents, the reversion clause if I died before transfer, and evidence tying both parents to the plan. The final blow was a recorded phone call from my father in custody, telling a business associate to clean up those water samples and referring to me as the problem child who never understood loyalty. When the judge ruled, there was overwhelming evidence to proceed to trial on all counts, including attempted murder. My mother broke into loud, theatrical sobs. My father's jaw clenched, his eyes still locked somewhere beyond the courtroom walls. Outside, the reporters swarmed again. But this time, Isabel stopped. My sister saved my life, she said, voice steady. Our parents were willing to kill their own daughter for money and to protect their crimes. That's the story you should be telling. For once, I didn't have to speak. The days after the hearing were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and media calls we didn't return. Isabel and I had one shared priority now, severing every legal and financial tie to our parents. We hired our own attorney, Vivian Santos, a sharp-minded woman with the patience of a saint and the bite of a pit bull when needed. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Your grandmother's trust is untouchable, she told me, flipping through a thick binder. The trustees have already expedited the transfer given the circumstances. But Harris Pharmaceuticals, we don't want it. I cut in before she could finish. Isabel nodded. Neither of us do. But we have to make sure the employees and the communities they hurt aren't abandoned. Vivian leaned forward. There's also the matter of their personal assets. Most will be seized or redirected to victim restitution, but some could legally pass to you as their only children. I met Isabel's gaze. For a moment, I saw my own conflicted feelings mirrored in her eyes. We'll decide later, I said. Right now, it's not about what we get, it's about what they can't use. The FBI's case grew stronger by the day. Former executives came forward in exchange for reduced sentences. Environmental testing confirmed exactly what I'd suspected: illegal waste dumping, groundwater contamination, and falsified safety studies going back more than a decade. The estimated cleanup alone would cost over $100 million. And through all of it, Isabel and I kept showing up to every meeting, every briefing, not as the daughters of Charles and Victoria Rockwell, but as the people willing to help dismantle what they'd built. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running from the Rockwell name. I was burning it to the ground. 2 months after the party, we went back. Not as daughters returning home, but as witnesses for the FBI. The house looked exactly the same from the outside: imposing, perfect, soulless. Inside, it was eerily silent. No staff, no music from my mother's curated playlists. Just the muffled echo of our footsteps over polished marble. FBI agents moved methodically through the rooms, cataloging evidence, photographing every document, every device. My father's study, once forbidden territory, was now a mess of open drawers and files spread across the desk. One agent called out, "Miss Rockwell, this was in the safe. Do you recognize it?" He handed me a small leather-bound journal, worn at the edges. My breath caught when I opened it. The handwriting was my grandmother Margaret's. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. Notes on experiments, letters never sent, quiet warnings about my parents' growing ambition. The final entry, dated just before her death, made my throat tighten. "I've arranged for Alyssa's financial independence. She alone has the conscience and strength to break the cycle of this family's poison." My fingers trembled as I closed the book. I turned to Isabel and handed it to her. She read the last line, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. She knew, all along. I nodded. "And you helped me survive this." That's what family actually means. Standing there in the very room where so many decisions had been made to hurt others, we made our own silent vow. Whatever came next, we would not become them. 6 months after the night everything shattered, I was standing on the porch of my grandmother's old lake house. The November air was crisp, the water catching the late afternoon sun like glass. This place had always felt different, safe. It was part of my inheritance, transferred to me just 3 weeks after the poisoning, when the trustees decided there was no reason to wait. The first thing I did was set aside a portion of the trust for Isabel's medical care and therapy. Physically, she was healing. Mentally, we were both still learning how to breathe without looking over our shoulders. "Hot chocolate delivery," Isabel's voice called from behind me. She stepped out onto the porch wrapped in one of my oversized sweaters, 2 steaming mugs in hand. She'd moved in last month, selling her downtown condo, the one that had been far too full of memories, corporate dinners, and parental approval. I smiled, taking a mug. Perfect timing. I was just thinking about how much has changed. "Everything," she agreed, settling into the chair beside mine. "Remember when we'd come here with Grandma Margaret? She'd let us stay up late, staring at the stars, telling us stories about women scientists who changed the world." I laughed softly. Mother hated those trips. She said Grandma was filling our heads with dangerous independence. "She wasn't wrong," Isabel said with a faint smile. Then her face turned thoughtful. "The prosecutors called this morning. They're offering a plea deal, 20 years for Dad, 15 for Mom if she testifies about the corporate fraud. They want to know if we object." I stared out over the water. "Do you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants them to face a trial, to have every detail exposed in court. But the other part just wants it to be over," I finished for her. We sat in silence for a while. "Sisters," but also survivors. For the first time in our lives, allies. My phone buzzed against the porch railing. A text from Dr. Harlan. Environmental job interview went well. They're impressed by your research proposal on pharmaceutical waste cleanup. Call me when you can. I smiled, tilting the screen toward Isabel. Looks like my plan to turn all this into something good might actually work. After the dust began to settle, I'd started reaching out to environmental science firms, especially those specializing in cleaning up industrial contamination. My background in biochemistry, combined with everything I'd learned about the Rockwell Company's mess, made me uniquely qualified to help fix the kind of damage they had caused. It felt right, almost poetic, to use their knowledge against the very harm they'd tried to bury. Isabel was finding her own new path. She'd resigned from Rockwell Therapeutics the day she was discharged from the hospital and had been working with investigators ever since, helping map the company's internal operations and identify which executives had been complicit in the crimes. Now she was talking about law school, environmental law, specifically. If I'm going to spend the rest of my life untangling the damage they caused, I might as well have the right tools, she told me one night. The house we grew up in was set to be seized the following week. The prosecutors had asked if there was anything personal we wanted to retrieve first. I shook my head immediately. Nothing I need from that place. I already took the real photo albums, Isabel said, not the staged portraits Mother had made for the magazines. The candid ones Nora took. Nora, our housekeeper for 15 years. The closest thing we'd had to a mother figure. She'd sent a care package from Florida last month with homemade cookies and a note. I always knew you two would break free. That note was now pinned to my kitchen corkboard. A small, quiet reminder that not all family is built from blood. 7 months after the graduation party, Isabel and I sat side by side in the same courtroom where our parents' bail had been denied. But this time, there would be no more hearings, no more delays, just the judge's final word. They looked smaller. The sharp suits were gone, replaced with muted, ill-fitting clothes. My mother's posture had lost its practiced elegance, though her eyes still darted toward reporters in the gallery. My father remained stone-faced, his hands clasped in front of him like a man determined not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him break. The judge read out the charges: attempted murder, environmental crimes, fraud, falsifying clinical data. Then came the terms of the plea deal: 20 years for him, 15 for her, both without the possibility of early parole. The judge asked if they wanted to make statements. My mother shook her head, her voice catching as she said, "No, Your Honor." My father stood, adjusting his jacket as though preparing for a business presentation. "I've dedicated my life to medical science," he began, his voice calm. "Everything I've done has been to protect this family and the company. Regulatory changes, political pressure, these things destroy good work. History will judge me more fairly than this court. Not one word of remorse. Not one acknowledgement of the lives they'd damaged or the daughter they'd tried to kill." When the gavel fell, I felt lighter. Not joyful, not vengeful, just free. Outside the courthouse, away from the cameras, Jenna and Naomi were waiting with Dr. Harlan. Jenna hugged me hard. "How do you feel?" I breathed in the cold winter air. Like I can finally exhale. The months after sentencing felt different. Quieter. Lighter. Isabel and I sold most of our parents' personal assets, directing nearly all of the proceeds into a victim compensation fund for those harmed by Rockwell Therapeutics' actions. I accepted a full-time position with the environmental remediation firm that had been interested in my proposal. My first major project? Overseeing the cleanup of the Westbrook facility site, the very plant my parents had been so desperate to keep out of the headlines. Standing there on my first day, watching crews in protective gear take water samples, I realized I was finally doing something that mattered. Isabel started her first semester of law school already diving into environmental and corporate accountability cases. She was busier than ever, but for the first time, her work wasn't about pleasing someone else. It was about making her own impact. We decided to keep the lake house. It became our shared refuge, the one place untouched by our parents' influence. Some nights we'd sit on the dock with mugs of tea, talking late into the night, not about the past, but about the kind of future we wanted. One evening, as the sky turned from orange to deep violet, Isabel asked quietly, "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" I thought for a long moment. I've let go of the anger. Carrying it was only hurting me. But forgiveness? That feels like it requires something they'll never give, real remorse. She nodded, staring at the water. Maybe forgiveness isn't the goal. Maybe breaking the cycle is. And sitting there beside her, I realized she was right. A year after that rooftop party, I stood at a podium in a packed conference hall, speaking about pharmaceutical waste remediation. The room was full of scientists, advocates, and policymakers, people fighting the same fight I'd been drawn to years ago. In the front row, Isabel sat with her notebook open, recording every word. Beside her were Jenna, Naomi, Dr. Harlan, and a few of my new colleagues, my chosen family. As I spoke about solutions and accountability, it hit me just how far I'd come. My parents had tried to poison me, not just with a compound in a champagne glass, but with a lifetime of control, manipulation, and doubt. And they'd failed. The money my grandmother left me gave me independence. But the true gift she passed down was belief that I could break the cycle and choose a different life. Now, I had. I looked out at the audience and ended my talk with a question I'd carried for months. Have you ever had to walk away from people who share your blood to protect your own life? If you have, know this: family is not defined by DNA. It's defined by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. And as the applause rose, I felt it: freedom, purpose, and a future that was entirely my own. Because in the end, the most powerful antidote to poison is truth.